We are live. What is up, swimmers and swammers? Welcome back to the SwimSwam Breakdown. As always, I'm your host, Coleman Hodges, coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, joined by my fellow New Yorker, Sophie Kaufman, as well as the swim scribe himself, David Clossy from St. Cloud, Minnesota. Glad you guys are here. For the week after NCAA is the biggest week in U.S. college swimming, there is a lot of action this week, kind of unexpected and kind of coming from all over. Long course, college, we've got it all. So we've got quite a few things, boxes to tick today. Let's get right into it. The Sacramento Pro Swim happened 3 days after the men's NCAA is concluded, essentially. It was a lighter crowd. I think a lot of people coming off of NCAAs kind of wanted a little break and weren't totally ready to jump back into long course racing. But we did see some college athletes. We saw a good contingents from France as well as Australia. But I'm curious what your highlights from this pro swim were. David, I'm going to come to you first. What'd you think of Sacramento?
For me, obviously, the biggest highlight is got to be Luka Orlando and that 200 butterfly. That was an incredible swim. And it's really, I think, everyone in the world is probably happy to see that kind of swim out of him, just after everything he's dealt with when it comes to injuries with his shoulder and stuff like that. And it really does feel like he basically just, he was kind of expected to go like this. And then he had this like gap here and he basically just like went right back up to where he would have been. It felt like going sub 153 in that 200 fly is pretty elite club, and just obliterating your personal best like that from like 153.8. It was like 1.4 something seconds, so almost a second and a half drop. He went from the 18th fastest performer of all time to the 4th, which is and the only 3 swimmers that are faster than him: Christoph Milak, Leon Marchand, Michael Phelps. That is fantastic company to be a part of. And I think one of the really interesting things, right, you mentioned how close to NCAAs this was. And I always enjoy the NCAA swimmers, particularly on the men's, just because the timing of it. It's a little bit easier to try and hold that taper because you don't have an extra week. That hop in that next Pro Swim series. I remember a standout last year was Hubert Koch did a pretty fast 100 fly with Dressel around the same time.
Yeah,
and so
50.8.
Yeah, and they tied for that too, which is that was a fun one. And he obviously was just off of that ridiculous 200-yard butterfly as well. And if you kind of look at the improvements that he made in both the meter swim and the yard swim, it all comes down to that front end speed. Seems like he's very comfortable with that. He was on both swims on the first 350s, he was faster than his old personal best, and then was just like a hair slower on the 450. So he's trading in that closing speed, but not by too much. He's not totally dying, and it is paying off big time. And I think it's just a nice thing to see, even if it's just a small personal best, we're like, yeah, go look up. But the fact that he just destroyed it like that, yeah, he's holding on to a taper, but there's probably still some wiggle room, right? Because that's not going to be as good of a taper as you are when you're just focusing in on a trials or a worlds in the summer. Other highlights for me, Brooks Curry was a surprise there. That was some serious speed with 46.7 and 48.3. That's really, I kind of looked at some other in-season swims that he's done, and that's really fast for him in season. And, even he obviously was a 45 high at Olympic trials last summer, but in I think it was the prelims was his fastest 100 free swim. He was 48.59. So he's faster than that there. So it seems like, could maybe he was a little quieter in 24, and he might catch some people off guard in the summer of 25,
Yeah, and I was not at Sacramento getting interviews, but in his post-race interview, he did say swimming's a weird sport, so you have to do weird things, and he's been watching some weird videos to inspire him, and there wasn't a follow-up on that, but next time I see him, I certainly have to ask him about what he's doing differently. I think it's really interesting when people try to do their own thing. I know Caleb Dressel famously watched videos of dolphins and cheetahs to see how they move on land and in water to make himself a better athlete in and out of the pool. And, obviously it's something worked for him. So we could be seeing some of that again, but yeah, it was nice to see him, especially after not seeing him at ACCs, where he was on the psych sheet. We hadn't seen him in a minute, and then to finally get to see him compete and have him look really good. Nice seeing him there. Sophie, what stood out to you about this meet?
Yeah, Brooks Curry was definitely a surprise for me too. I mean, we haven't really seen him race since the Olympics, and he was a prelims only swimmer, I think, for the 4x200. But so to see him go the 48.3, he's now the fastest American man this season, and then the 22.0 free, which was faster than what he went at Olympic trials, was definitely exciting. Kind of sticking with the sprint freestyle, I thought it was really exciting to see Julia Dennis kind of keep rolling. She had a big breakout in yards this postseason, highlighted by the 21.0 she went at ACCs in the 50-yard freestyle. Then she was third at NCAAs, and she broke 25 seconds for the first time in the 50 freestyle in Sacramento in prelims with a 24.9, and then dropped another 0.2 for a 24.79 in the final. I know she also gave an interview talking about kind of ripping the Band-Aid off with the long course racing. And I think it's really exciting to see her kind of, the women had another week between NCAAs and Sacramento. So we saw some Louisville swimmers, a ton of NC State swimmers at this meet, swimming, having some exciting swims too. Leah Shackley, the 59.900 back, was really encouraging for this point in the season. So I think watching them try to make that transition and try and move up in the long course American rankings will be something that'll be really interesting to watch. There's one more pro swim in Fort Lauderdale, I believe, and then it's U.S. Nationals time. So things are moving.
Yeah, I feel like that long course season always sneaks up on you, right? It's like, okay, college season over. Okay, long course now. Okay, end of long course. Boom. It's like it all happens so quickly, especially for international swimmers who have their trials in April, right, or May. Not a lot of time to focus on long course, but I did like. Kudos to all of the women who competed at women's NCAAs, then had that like weird week and a half gap, and then went to Sacramento again across the country for most of those swimmers to like go compete and get some long course reps in. Like, good for them. Like I said, good contingents from France and Australia. Love seeing anytime we can see Maxime Grousset race. Like, he is a true professional. He always seemingly swims pretty fast. He did here. I think he won the 50, 100 free and 100 fly.
I think he tied with Michael Andrew in the 50, right?
Okay. Yeah.
He still won, but yeah.
Yeah. Like 22.0, 48 low, and 51.4, I think, in the 100 fly.
Yeah, I think he was 48.2, exactly 1/10 ahead of Curry. So he had a nice close race in that one too.
Yeah. So like, he's looking good coming off of his Olympic medal performance in that 400 medley relay in Paris. And then to see the Australians, Max Giuliani and Sam Short, coming off of their altitude training in Flagstaff to compete here again. Yeah, just kind of a shame that we didn't have more of an American contingent just to like bolster, make this a little deeper field and like really give them some competition. I feel like that was an opportunity to really have an international meet or like a little mini international preview of what we might see this summer at Worlds, but we'll see how Fort Lauderdale does. I think, especially being on the East Coast, hopefully we'll get a fairly international crowd there as well. So we'll see. But, as I was talking to Sophie off camera, there were only 11 women in the 200 fly at this meet. So some events were more sparse than others. Not the deepest fields, but there were some standout swims. And overall, solid pro swim. We've got more long course swimming to discuss later. But right now, I do want to turn to the House settlement final hearing, which I guess it might be the final hearing, but it's still not settled. But Sophie, you actually did live updates on this. Can you give us the cliff notes of how this final hearing went down? What were the main takeaways, and what it will look like moving forward?
Yeah, so I did the back half of coverage for this. Somebody else was on the first half. So this was a hearing that went for 7 hours and kind of had a chaotic conclusion as people were worried that the building was going to lock at exactly 5 p.m. So everybody had to be out of the building by 5 p.m. So it was a little chaotic in the last hour. But for people who weren't watching, the way that the structure of the day went was that the 14 objectors spoke first, and that was kind of the bulk of the day. And then later in the day, Judge Claudia Wilkin, who is the one who's eventually going to rule on this case, she had a chance to ask questions of all of the parties that were in the courtroom. So she essentially had 3 options coming into today. She could grant final approval, like right there in the courtroom. She could reject the settlement, or she could say that she was inclined to grant final approval if certain changes were made. She said pretty early in the day that she was not going to grant final approval, like right there. And essentially what happened was that she took the 3rd option. So in the questions that she asked, it kind of became clear that she has 2 main issues with the settlement as it's currently worded. The first is that she kind of wants there to be changes made that provide a phase-in period or a grandfathering in for the new roster limits that the settlement proposes. And the second is that she wants to adjust the language that's related to binding future athletes to this agreement. If the settlement is agreed to, the term is 10 years. So one thing that kind of kept coming up in the room was there are 10-year-olds right now who are going to be bound by this settlement if it gets approved, who didn't really have any say in how the settlement got worked out. So she basically said that she wants to see adjustments made to the language in these clauses or the things that kind of relate to this. So she said that she was inclined to grant final approval. Her quote was, I think it's a good settlement. Don't quote me on that. I think it's worth pursuing, and I think some of these things can be fixed. So what happens now is that the lawyers have a week to implement these changes, and then objectors will have another day to respond to the changes that get made, and then they'll kind of all meet back and reconvene, and we'll see where they are. Will be interesting to see in the courtroom the NCAA lawyers pushed back against both of the issues that she has with them. They've been against the idea of grandfathering in things from the start. They were pretty adamant that they need the 10-year term if the settlement is going to get final approval. So it'll be interesting to see how, once they reconvene with their clients, the NCAA and the Power 4 conferences, how or if the changes get made, and if that gets the settlement to a point where Judge Wilkin will grant final approval.
Wow. First of all, Sophie, thank you so much. That was a great recap. I feel fully informed now, even more so than I did after reading the full recap. But moreover, I guess from a swimming perspective, and David, I'm curious on your just general thoughts of this update to the House settlement. What sticks out to me is that even if they grandfather in roster limits, those are already, like, conferences are already making their own roster limits at this point. So it sounds good on paper, but I'm not even sure how much that will actually affect swim teams now, because they already have the roster limits and, like, so many swimmers have already gotten cut. But I guess it could affect roster limits in the future or moving forward for the next few years. That was my initial thought on that. David, I'm curious what you make of all this.
Yeah, I kind of agree with what you just said there when it comes to, like, the fact that decisions have already been made. You mentioned that, like, conferences have already kind of been preemptively, almost defensively imposing these roster limits, which I generally think has been a smart move, even though it's not an ideal situation, just in terms of, okay, like, how much can we control right now before more stuff is forced upon us? Like, if we kind of get out ahead of it, we can kind of keep, a hand on the wheel for as long as possible, make things, if they're already going to be a certain level of bad, we can make them slightly less bad. I think one of the most maybe potentially awkward things that if they do try and roll back any cuts or anything like that is if you're an athlete that was just cut and then the coach says, hey, JK, And obviously that's, going to depend on the entire situation, and everything surrounding it. Obviously, if it it's like, I get it. The nice thing I guess about swimming is that it's a very objective sport. If you're the 5th fastest 100 freestyler on a team, you might not really be making a big stink about the fact that why aren't I on the 400 free relay? Well, because the numbers don't lie compared to other sports where there's a bit more subjectivity to it, and like actual being able to play out a game and stuff like that. I feel like the cuts can even be a little bit more difficult. Obviously, in general, it's not an ideal situation. Nothing about this is an ideal situation. The ideal situation is that I wake up and this was a dream, and that there was no hearing because there wasn't a case. But I with things as they are right now, a phase-in period and stuff like that, and trying to adjust things and give at least an opening for either changes that haven't been made or to roll back some changes. I think that outside of the awkward potential situations is better than things just proceeding as they are, things like that. So it's not ideal, but it's actually the crumb of good news in that is more than I was expecting to get out of that day, quite honestly.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I guess, Sophie, I'm also curious if you just have any thoughts about the repercussions or what this could look like from a college swimming perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you both are talking about, right? Like, despite the getting sent away to rework some of the language, the NCAA lawyers were fairly positive that this is going to get approved and that they don't see any a reason to push back the July 1st implementation date that's going to happen if the settlement does get approved. They're not foreseeing that that's going to get pushed back at all. So it makes total sense that these conferences are trying to be preemptive about that. And that's led to some, I'm sure tough conversations and some unfortunate things happening for college swimmers and divers. And I don't really, unfortunately, see that changing so much. I think it's just going to become more prevalent. We saw the flood of swimmers in the transfer portal when it opened, which, we'll get to in a little bit. And that it just seems like it's going to be something that continues into the spring and the summer as swimmers trying to figure out what they want from the sport and what's possible for them going forward.
That's a great way to put it. And I'm also really curious how the fall looks, because I know there was talk of pushing back, teams' first dual meet until maybe even November, so that they don't have to make the roster adjustment or final cuts or have their, set 22 athlete roster for some schools until like November 1 or until their first competition. And so it will be, as you said, Sophie, just really interesting to see how this keeps playing out and where the chips land as they continue to fall. So that is the House settlement final hearing update. As you mentioned, Sophie, now we will turn to transfers, because we have had a heck of a week of announcements of who is in the portal, who is going where, between verbal commits and just names popping up in the transfer portal. The biggest of which was Miss Bella Sims, who had a couple big articles on SwimSwam this week. On the last breakdown, we talked about her doping, her positive test that turned out to be a no-fault situation. So she will not be penalized for that positive test there. And then the next day, her name popped up in the transfer portal. She did have a no contact, whatever you call it, meaning that coaches are not allowed to talk to her. She is allowed to reach out to coaches. I'm curious, just your thoughts. She's obviously leaving the University of Florida, or, that is where she would be leaving if she ends up transferring. Where do you think is a good landing spot for Bella Sims after the 2 NCAA seasons she's had with Florida that include multiple NCAA titles? At least one. Sorry, Sophie. I'm going to throw this one to you first.
Oh, I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how she approaches this. She has that do not contact note. Obviously, any school is going to want her. She has won multiple NCAA titles. Even when She arguably wasn't at her best at this NCAA's. She was still a big time point scorer for Florida, really valuable on their relays. So she's going to be a boost for any team. It'll be interesting to see, we've heard from her after trials about maybe what wasn't working for her in her training at Florida. So far, it'll be interesting to see what kind of experience she's looking for next. If she, and especially in terms of like relating to volume, the Sandpipers are known for just hammering the yardage. And that's worked for people like Bella, Katie Grimes, Claire Weinstein have all found a lot of success with that. So it'll be interesting to see if she turns to a program that's similar, or, if she is looking to work on her backstroke more. There's a lot of different options that you could see her trying to pursue as she looks to, try and make it back on the U.S. senior international team for this summer.
Yeah. I didn't hear an answer.
Yeah, I don't really have one. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting where she goes. I thought the transfer was interesting. There is a world where you think, okay, she's just going to go back to Sandpipers, but the fact that she's in the portal does imply that she wants to stay in the NCAA. So I really don't know. Is there going to be like an up and coming program? Like, is Indiana or Michigan gonna grab her, and that's gonna be what takes them to the next level? Or, is she gonna go to a place like Cal, where we know Claire Weinstein is committed? There's a lot of different options for her. Is she gonna go to Virginia?
That's Michigan would be fascinating, especially. They had a great year. Matt Bow is in his second or third season as head coach, and it seemed like this year both men's and women's teams really hit their stride. I like these options that you've provided, David. Do you have a more solid or set answer?
I always think it's difficult. I'm just going to preface this before any of the transfer talk. I always think it's difficult to try and predict because you never know for what reasons exactly, right? Some people, It's like, okay, are they moving close to home? Some people, not necessarily the case for Sims, right? But people who are clearly not going to make a career out of swimming. It's like, is it just an academic move? That I feel like a lot of people forget that. Like, even if they are top tier athletes, like, yeah, they're going to be very solid in the NCAA for 4 years, and then they're going to need a career after that. Not the situation here, but that's just kind of general rule of thumb. It's like, I feel like that kind of gets forgotten, where it's like, no, they might just have a really good insert major here program at that school they're going to. I did see, this was one of the schools that Sophie mentioned, and the Claire Weinstein piece that adds a bit more to this. I saw someone on Twitter, I don't remember who, point out that she is now following Cal on Instagram. So I'm going to guess Cal, because that sounds, and also, like, if we're talking about, they're also someone that they like to go a bit harder during the season, really kind of load up yardage. And so if that's kind of the style that she still feels like she's found the most success with, that's one of I feel like that'd be like a point potentially, unless she's really looking for a radical change, potential pointing at somewhere like Virginia that is leaning away from that methodology.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because by all accounts, every time I've been there, Florida does the same. Florida is not a low volume program. And it's also interesting. Like, this was so surprising to me because she was very close at winning 2 NCAA titles this year, 2 weeks ago, like not far in both backstrokes, right? Especially in the 100, less than a tenth. And I'm really curious if this would have changed anything for her, if she would have won specifically that 100 backstroke title, like, would she still be in the transfer portal? And obviously, as David said, you never know. You never know what's going on with her. She's obviously been through a lot this season with the whole dealing with the positive drug test behind the scenes. I'm sure that adds a lot of stress, but I think that, and maybe with that, sometimes you just need a new environment, and maybe, there wasn't really anything wrong with the old one, but you just need a new place. And I think, especially with early in your college career, I think that's pretty viable. You're young, you're changing, you're going through so many changes, you're discovering yourself as a person, let alone an athlete. It's like, yeah, you just never know what's going on. But I was really curious Because again, I'm sure her 500 free was not what she wanted, but like in 2 of her 3 events, she did pretty dang good at NCAAs, right? And overall, it seemed like she had quite a successful season. And I don't feel like you always see transfers pop up after something like that. However, we certainly see it more now, right? And a few of the other transfers we're going to get to, that seems to be the case as well. I don't know. Yeah, a good landing spot for Bella. I'm not sure because it does depend on what she wants, right? I mean, I think Virginia's the obvious answer because they seemingly can do no wrong. She's got Katie Grimes there. But I think it seems like there are now quite a lot of viable options that could be good for a variety of reasons. Also, Bella is just like crazy versatile, right? She can sprint. She can do distance. She could train for the mile if she wanted. She could train for the 50 free if she wanted. Like any program could take her in a number of directions. So Sophie, I'm sticking with you. I'm not going to give an answer. I don't know. But it'll be really interesting to see how this progresses and where she ends up. I hope she finds a good fit. I feel like Instagram is usually kind of telling though. So it seems in my mind, Cal's the front runner. If she's following them on Instagram, if
it's on Instagram, it has to be true.
Those are easy dots to connect, right? All right, let's move on to some other key transfers and where you think they might end up or would be good landing spots for them. Lucy Mehraban, I don't know if I'm saying that right. NCAA Relay All-American for Louisville. She just finished up her sophomore season. She went 3 best times this year, 2 at NCAAs and 1 at ACCs, 22-0 in the 50, 47-8 in the 100, 145-5 in the 200. She was on Louisville's NCAA All-American relays. She hails. So again, kind of surprising to see her in the transfer portal. Just again, because by all accounts, seems like she was having success at Louisville, had a good swim season. She's from Ann Arbor, Michigan. I have to think Michigan is like in the running again. They're a team on the rise. Are there? I also feel like I saw somewhere in the comments someone had said she's going to UVA. Are there any other standouts for you in terms of landing spots for Miss Mehraban, David or Sophie?
Well, guess what, Coleman? Based off of what you said, guess who she follows on Instagram? It's the University of Michigan. That could be because she's from the area. Because, and I may have missed some schools because I'm normally just like think of a couple and then also just do swim because most of them are school swim and dive or whatever. Also Miami.
Okay.
Which is entirely that maybe she just knows someone who swims at Miami. Which is also
Miami also on the rise. They had 2 NCAA scoring swimmers, I believe. At least 1.
That sounds right.
So okay, good clues. Good.
You basically
guesses.
echoed my thoughts, right? Where it's like, okay, from Ann Arbor, is she maybe going to Michigan, school on the rise, and then also, like you said, if things look like they're working, that makes me think that maybe it's less of a okay, I need a change or whatever. It could be something like I want to be closer to home, right? You know, or whatever. Another reason outside of this program isn't working, because at least from what we can see, just looking at numbers, it looks like it's working by all accounts. Maybe it could be working more better, but.
Absolutely. And then another high profile transfer, NCAA runner-up Mackenzie Miller from BYU. She made history 2 weeks ago, becoming BYU's first All-American since 1991. She has 1 year of eligibility remaining. She just finished up her junior season. She went 2:05.0 in the 200 breast to finish second at this year's NCAAs behind Stanford's Lucy Bell. Curious if you guys have any insight or any potential landing spots for Mackenzie Miller, especially I feel like there are certain schools that are known for breaststroke, right? And especially with her having 1 year, where do you think a good landing spot might be for Mackenzie?
I mean, the obvious answer is Indiana, right? Like known for their breaststroke. We've seen them pick up someone with 1 year of eligibility remaining. You know, they got Brian Benzing on the men's side this year.
Casper Corbo.
Of course, Casper Corbo as well. They recently just signed the D2 record holder for next season, Jonette Lagerud from Norway. She was a freshman, so she's got a lot more eligibility, but wow. They're paying attention to the transfer portal. You know, and Virginia is as well. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, the Cavaliers got Brendan Greenwald, another NCAA Division II record holder and champion from this year. They got Lawson Ficken from Auburn. You know, these schools, they're following who's in the transfer portal, and it'll be interesting to see how, you know, for Virginia in particular, looking to, you can't replace Gretchen Walsh, but they're in an interesting spot coming off of this 5th title and how they kind of keep themselves at the top of the NCAA. Picking up valuable swimmers that are in the transfer portal for whatever reason, be it fallout from the roster limit implementations, from swimmers wanting to be closer to home, wanting to change. You know, you can make your team a lot better that way. We've seen that this year. We've seen it in other sports with transfer portal rules changing. So I think it's interesting to follow, you know, which of these bigger programs are picking up these athletes who find themselves in the portal for one reason or another.
And speaking of who's in the transfer portal, you get that. Kamal Muhammad, who spent 2 years at Virginia, recently announced he is transferring to the University of Tennessee, which I'm sure he will be a welcome addition to that sprint core after losing Jordan Crooks this year. And Lamar Taylor, is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think he only had 1 year left.
Okay, that's what I thought, but they'll retain, you know, 2 of their members from their NCAA winning and record-setting 200 and 400 free relays in Guy Caribe and Nikolai Blackman. And so I'm sure Kamal Muhammad will probably look to continue that tradition of male sprinting excellence at UT. So a lot of movement in the NCAA this week. Any other thoughts on any transfers or just the transferring in general before we move on to our next topic?
Yeah, the other one that was announced today that we haven't mentioned yet is the Cal Baptist All-American in the 100 freestyle, Remi Fabiani, going to ASU.
For 1 year. He's got 1 year of eligibility left. Yeah, I didn't even know who this guy was pre-NCAAs, but 41 in the 100 free, 18 in the 50 free. He's been a revelation for Cal Baptist. And yeah, Sophie, as you said, he announced today spending his last year of eligibility at Arizona State, which I think at this point, I think we can call that Sprint U, because what they're doing on the men's sprint side, what Herbie Boehm is doing is pretty solid.
Yeah. Well, you can talk. You can tell Tennessee that.
You're right. I just mean, like, they had 7 or 8 guys who all went 18 this year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's impressive. I mean, obviously Tennessee has 2 NCAA records in the sprint relay, so you can't argue with that. But yeah, a lot of movement. Thank you for bringing that one up, Sophie. So I'm sure this will come up on many more breakdowns, like we said, throughout the spring and the summer. Transfer portal open for business. But on that note, let's throw a bone to our international friends. We've got some long course racing happening over the pond and around the world. Swim Open Stockholm is coming up, I think, this weekend. A lot of exciting and fast racers scheduled to jump in the pool in this one. David, I'll throw this one to you first. Who are you most excited to see in Sweden this weekend?
I mean, after we just saw Chalmers light it up in Norway, he's definitely at the top of my list. That 47.27 is insane. For someone with as storied of a career in the 100 freestyle as Chalmers, the fact that he just pops his 4th fastest swim ever, that's pretty crazy. Faster than his Paris time, faster than his, Rio gold medal winning time, faster than a lot of swims, and definitely faster than any of his in-season swims. And so, and it seems like he's been, because he also broke 22 seconds for his second time ever in his career, took 0.2 off his personal best at that meet, which to me makes it seem like he's working on that opening speed, because we're getting at the point where it's hard to exist in this really deep, really fast 100 freestyle with just a back half, because you need to fight through literally everyone. I actually just did a video about this, these swims, released it last night. And during the writing for that, I realized, wow, he really is a back halfer. In Rio, 7th at the turn. In 19 and 21, he was 3rd, but that's because him and Dressel were quite a ways ahead of the field. So it was more just pushing and past everyone. In 2023, tied with Pan for 7th, which means last in a field of 8. And in Paris, he was 8th. Popovich was 7th. And
oh my God.
I think just with how close this field is getting, like if you look at the Paris podium, it was obviously 1st and then a big gap, and then 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, 1/100th, 1/100th, 1/100th between all of them. It's risky to be too. Yeah, it was. I mean, if he goes 300 slower, he goes from silver medal to no medal. It's crazy tight, and just for even minor medals right now. And the fact that he won, once you're halfway through the race, you have way less time to try and make up any ground. But then also, when you're so far back, you're right in that wash, and then you need to work even harder to make up those gains. So if you can be a little bit closer to the field, you position yourself to really battle it out with that a veteran like this is capable of doing when it counts. And so I think really just seeing how much this potential working with this front end speed is going to carry over. While he's still racing, is he going to be a swim that's on the same kind of level, or is he going to be showing, if he's entered 50 free again, is he going to drop that best time even more? Is he going to go for it a lot more on the opening of the 100 free? I think there's a lot of things that'll be interesting to see from him. Otherwise, some just general entries. Lucas Martins, I'm really excited to see him. Just see what he can do, because he was pretty exciting in the lead up to Paris, and obviously won that gold in the 400 free. And then we also got Kieran Smith there. And so if you put those guys in the same races, then they're both racers. And I think that, the battles in that mid-distance territory can be some of the most exciting swims, even if you throw times out of it, just like at in-season meets. There's a lot more room to be more tactical with it. So it makes it really enjoyable just to watch and kind of see what happens. And then this one, it just caught my eye because of course it does after Paris. I did see that the one, the only, the Muffin Man has entered.
Forgot about the Muffin Man. Heck yeah, he is. Well, that is exciting. Yeah, I'm excited that Kieran Smith appears to be one of, if not the only American who's entered in the meet. And that just made me happy, because you don't see, we are not a very international peoples, right? Like, especially swimmers, we stay in our little bubble. They train. They hardly ever, it's pulling teeth just to get to some Americans to go to a pro swim in our country, right? They'd rather go to a sectional meet in their backyard. And it's very cool to see American swimmers going and competing internationally at meets like this, at in-season meets that, it might not make the most financial sense. It might not make the most practical sense in a training block, but it's really cool. And I'm sure it's good experience for the swimmers. This is like a 3-stop, I guess, Scandinavian tour where they started in Bergen, Norway. They go to Stockholm in Sweden. And then the third country is the other country that I'm forgetting right now. I'm sorry about that. Finland. They go to Finland for the third stop. And so it's like you have the opportunity to get some good racing in if you so choose. And I don't know if Kieran went to the other stop, is going to the next stop, but just the fact that he's here made me very happy. A few other names I'm excited to see. Xavier Mashuk. We still really we're not positive. I think he's scheduled to show up at Texas in the fall, but we'll see if he does. But it's always exciting to see him swim. Ahmed Jaoudi of Tunisia, and Victor Johansson of Sweden, also adding to that men's distance depth at this, as well as Ruta Melutite. I feel like she can always pop off some really exciting swims, no matter what the time of season is. So, Sophie, any highlights for you from this meet? I know we've covered a lot, but any other names you're looking forward to seeing?
Yeah, I think in general, the men's distance, 400 and above, is really what I'm most excited for. I think in addition to all the names that you guys just mentioned, the German freestyle depth in the 400 and above is so strong. And when they race, at Worlds and stuff, we only get to see 2 of them, but they've had a big battle just to get there, kind of like the Brits in the 200 freestyle. So to get to see Martins, Oliver Clements, Sven Schwartz, all race head to head in a field that's got, Joati, who's been just on an incredible improvement trajectory, it feels like, for the last year, plus Kieran Smith. It's a really exciting field. And then on the women's side, Isabella Gosha, as well, has had a great year. She won a medal in Paris. She won another one at Short Course Worlds, and then Marit Steenbergen as well. She's such a versatile swimmer and such an important part of the Dutch women's team. It'd be really interesting to see where she's at this point in her season, because I feel like she's also somebody who you never know what she's going to throw down when she gets on the blocks.
Oh, that's a good one. I didn't even see Marit Steenbergen in there. All to say, lot of great names competing in Sweden this weekend. So tune into that. On that note, let's end this breakdown with a few quick sinker swims, staying with the Swim Open Stockholm. After Kyle Chalmers' 47.2 from Bergen, I think it's worth noting that Kyle Chalmers is soon-to-be baby mama / fiance is from Norway. So I'm guessing he had at least a bit of like home field advantage type energy happening in Bergen with that when he popped that 47.2 and 21 in the 50 free. Because he's now been there at least a couple times, and I think that is playing a big part in why he is competing there now. So I do think that's worth noting in this sinker swim. He threw down 47.2 in Norway. Will he go faster in the 100 free in Sweden? David?
It feels weirdly pessimistic, but I'm going to sink it just because 47.27 is so fast. And, like you mentioned, if there's maybe some potential inherited home field advantage by proxy, I guess, in there, or even just thinking like, at a certain point, as it adds up, the travel might kind of take its toll because it's kind of a somewhat quick turnaround. Whoops. And I think it just comes down to, at least in that 100 free, because it was so impressive and so fast, that boy howdy, if he goes faster, I'm terrified of what he's going to do. I just want to see him go a 46 at some point. He's done pretty much everything else in that event. I just want to see a 46 next Tuesday. He doesn't need to drop much. He just needs to drop 900ths and he's there.
Yeah.
But he'll go faster later this season. For now, it's a sink.
Fair enough. Sophie?
Yeah, it's a sink for me as well. His Bergen swims did have another SwimSwam writer texting me, locking in the Kyle Chalmers LA 2028 gold prediction early. But I think just as far as this weekend goes, it'll be a sink. Whatever. Keeps it interesting. And when they're right, it's on record.
Yeah.
You got to call the shots early so you can be more right. But yeah, I think it's a sink for this weekend. I really agree with a lot of what David had to say about his analysis of that 100 freestyle. And, if he is working on his opening speed, I could potentially see him dropping a few hundredths again in the 50 free. But the 47.2 is so fast. It would be very impressive and also surprising if he goes faster this weekend.
I'll make the case to swim it. And I think what Kyle has going for him now is that, these back-to-back racings, we see it with World Cups a lot, is you can swim a race and then make changes in like real time, right? Like you implement them in training for a few days and then you go out there and do it again. And this is how Kyle Chalmers set the world record in the 100 free that still stands. He did it at the World Cup when he was racing back to back to back short course meter 100 freestyles. And so I don't know how realistic this swim is, but I'll be optimistic. I like variety. I'll swim this and say, Kyle had a great swim in Norway. He'll make a few adjustments. He'll go back to the lab and in Sweden this weekend. I think there will be a bit more competition. He'll make a few adjustments, go a little bit faster, maybe even go best time, dip under 46. Again, wouldn't be the first time we've seen a Kyle Chalmers best time in season in the 100 freestyle. The only thing is, like, I'm curious how that translates to long course versus I think it's probably easier to do back-to-back races short course than it is long course, but it's not like it's 2 days difference. He has a full week, so I think he'll be okay. Next up on Sink or Swim, Luka Mijatovic. 15-year-old Luka Mijatovic went 4:10.9 in the 500 freestyle. Breaks his own national age group record, which everyone already thought was insane. It was a 4:12. Kids 15 would have gotten 11th at NCAAs in the 500 free, which is also crazy to say, but like for the opposite reason, like you say 4:10 and you're like, that has to be top 8 at NCAAs, and it's not, but it would have scored. So Sink or Swim, after this 4:10.9 500 free from Luka, will he make the Singapore World Championships team this summer? Sophie, I'm gonna go to you this for first.
I think the door is certainly open for him to do it, but I'm going to sink this one. There is the opportunity there in the 400, but we're not kind of sure what that's going to look like yet. Is Carson Foster going to swim this? What's Rex Maurer going to do after the great year he's had? The 800 and 1500, you've got a bunch of people fighting for one spot, kind of behind Bobby Fink, who was also turned in a really impressive 1650 in a time trial swim a couple weeks ago.
Wait, really?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have it pulled up, so I don't want to say anything that's wrong about what he went.
Go ahead.
But, and there's some questions about what that field looks like too. What's Luke Whitlock going to bring? David Johnson, the other Olympian. But I'm going to sink this one. And I think also, like, he's 15. It's okay if he doesn't make this team. He's clearly going to be a big star, but there's also plenty of learning opportunities if when he goes to World Juniors, and so I think that even if he misses, it's not like, I don't think the SwimSwam comments will be chill necessarily, because that's not a word I would use to describe the SwimSwam comment section, but I think everybody can just take a deep breath and be calm about it.
I think that's fair enough. David, how do you feel about this?
My heart very much wants to swim it. I love watching him just get ridiculously fast. And it's one of those things where he went at last year's Olympic trials, he went a personal best of 350.7 for 12th out of the prelims in that 400 free. Like you said, 800, 1500, even harder because there's basically one spot available. I totally forgot about this. I was looking, in March, he went a personal best at Westmont, 348.9. Wouldn't have bumped him into the final quite yet. And I think just, I think I saw some people pointing this out, right? Is that if you just look at even just 500 times, the amount of people who are going to be in the field in World's trials that have been a few seconds faster in the 500, who will be there potentially going for a spot in that 400. Just quite a few. We're having a lot more people go quite a ways under 410. So I'm gonna sink it, but I think it's actually going to be a good thing, because I think he's going to make the final in at least one of his races and be in the fight for a little bit. which I think is good for that to happen. Obviously Worlds is high stakes, but compared to 2028 Olympic trials, you don't want that to be your first time where you're really fighting for a spot and, not just making the final, but in the hunt for it for a bit of time. And so I think it'll be a miss, but I think it'll be a very strong learning opportunity because he's clearly got the ability to go fast, but to race under that just tremendous pressure is going to be something that I think maybe takes a few cracks to get just right.
I'm with you guys. I'm sinking this one for now. I think Luka is a rising star. I think so far he's had an historic career, but I think not this time. I think he'll be ready for 28 if this continues. I think maybe even hopefully this summer makes a junior team, gets to compete internationally, makes some finals of trials. I think that'll all be great experience, like you guys said, but I don't see it yet. Maybe in the next 2 months, my opinion will change, though. We'll see. Last up, speaking of gold medal predictions, Noe Ponti of Switzerland threw down a casual 50.2 in the 100 fly this past weekend. After seeing the season Noe has had, both short course and long course, since the Paris Olympics, where he was 4th or 5th in both butterfly events, do you see him winning gold this summer in Singapore? David?
This is another, because again, watching him in the short course pool was tremendous over that line. He was had a lot of really good momentum behind him into Paris. He went I don't remember exactly how fast he was. He was stupid fast though, in the lead up to Paris, then gained a little bit of time and just missed out on some medals there. I just think, again, I love watching him swim. I want to be wrong because I think it would be cool to see, an upset win in an event. I'm going to sink it though, because I think, you got Josh Liendo, who's a 49-second 100 butterflyer. You have Christoph Milak, who's a 49-second 100 butterflyer. And you also have, other people who could potentially, who hasn't been as fast as Ponti, but also had the chance to try and be in that same kind of dark horse spoiler boat for that gold medal. So I'm like, Ilya Haroun and Luca Orlando, who are both, have some speed behind them. Luca, I'm basing purely off of his ridiculous 200 fly, whereas Ilya is the bronze medalist. And so I just think that it feels like a question of Ponti versus the field. I'm going to go with the field.
Yeah, fine. Sophie?
I guess this is my place to have some blind optimism because I kind of feel like, sure, why not? It's interesting when you think about like what this field could look like. And there's so many people, taking a break, trying some off events this season, just having a general chill post-Olympic year. But that doesn't really feel like the case for this field, certainly in terms of like the final that we saw in Paris. We're expecting that the entire podium will be back. There's Maxime Grousset, the 2023 world champion. There's a ton of people in this race who can go fast, who have broken 50 seconds before, which is something that Ponti has not yet done. I believe he's gotten pretty close, but hasn't done it. But I'm still going to swim this. I think that it's pretty hard the Ponti versus the field is a compelling argument when you phrase it like that, but he's also just riding such a wave of momentum, for months now, and it hasn't slowed down. So it's hard to bet against that at this point as well, even as compelling as, well, there's 7 other guys in the final. So I'll swim it.
I'm with you, Sophie. It's not a smart choice, but I think Ponti has something to prove, and I think at least a few of those butterflyers probably don't. Christoph Milak, what the heck does he have to prove, right? He's won a gold medal in this. He has a world record in the 200 fly. He's won numerous world titles. Like, he probably doesn't have that fire or motivation to prove something. It's like Josh Liendo hasn't won a gold medal individually, but has a medal, I think Noe, after winning his bronze in this event in Tokyo, probably put a lot of pressure on himself to repeat that medal performance in Paris, and not having done that, I think he can probably let himself swim a little more freely, but also still is quite motivated to perform and achieve. And we saw that in his short course season, when he just lit it up. And I think we're seeing that now in his long course season, where he is showing that he can have similar success in the 50-meter pool. And I think he's going to carry that into world championships with him. Ponti versus the field, it is a tough sell, and I don't feel great about it, but for now, I'm going to swim it 50. If he can go a couple tenths faster come Singapore, I think he wins a world title.
I'm really glad I chose to sink it, because I was very close to swimming it just out of optimism, and it would have been really funny if all three of us did, for the same reason of I want it to happen. So I'm glad that I'm just the Grinch over here, I guess.
It's all right. Someone has to be.
Yeah. I'll be the heel.
Hey, and with that is our breakdown. We've got lots of exciting swimming coming up. It just does not stop. But we've got international swimming from Sweden this weekend, so stay tuned for that. We'll be back with the breakdown next weekend. Thanks so much for tuning